Our readings today open with a seminal story of Moses meeting God in the burning bush. To me, this is the pinnacle of the Old Testament. If the Old Testament were a musical, this would be the overture, the opening number that sets the scene for the whole rest of the book. God tells Moses everything he needs to know, starting with the most important injunction. Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. I've always been curious about this statement, which says something so important about our world. God tells Moses that the place he is standing is holy ground. So just how far from the burning bush is the holy ground? Are we talking 20 yards, quarter mile, a hectare? I absolutely cannot force myself to believe that holiness is somehow limited to a certain space or time. So if Moses was standing on holy ground, so are we. Which takes us to the reading today from Luke. The reading seems to have two parts. In the first part, Jesus is talking with other people about some Galileans whom Pilate has killed, and then, in an acme of sacrilege, mixed their blood with the blood and carcass of animals and used it as a sacrifice to a pagan god. Jesus asks a rhetorical question. Do you think that because these Galileans suffered in this way, they were worse sinners than all other Galileans? Now keep in mind that at that time, if anything bad happened to someone, a crop failed, a child was born with a cleft palate, it was assumed that it was because the person's sins or the sins of their ancestors. Now, I hadn't thought about it before I started writing the sermon, but this idea that if bad things happen, it's because we're doing it wrong is a lot like the current prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel puts it in an affirmative sense, saying if you're right with God, everything will fall in place. But if everything isn't going well, then you must have done it wrong. You didn't pray hard enough, you didn't believe fervently enough, you didn't offer up the right sacrifice. But here's Jesus answering, no, this is not about the sins of your family. This is not about you carrying out prescribed actions. The only thing that changes the situation is turning to God. And then Jesus shares a really confusing parable. To paraphrase, a man had a fig tree in his garden. He came looking for fruit, and there wasn't any. So he said to the gardener, "What the heck? For 3 years I've come looking for fruit on this fig tree, and there isn't any. Cut it down. Why should it be wasting the soil?" And the gardener replies, "Let it be for another year. I'll dig around it, I'll put some manure on it. If it bears fruit next year, well and good. If not, cut it down then." Now, Jesus normally starts these parables with, "The kingdom of heaven is like," and then he tells the parable. And I'm making that assumption here, that this is a story about the kingdom of heaven. But what does it mean? There are actually a number of ways we can look at it. I looked online, and one of the dominant interpretations of this parable was that God is the landowner, demanding that the tree bear fruit or get cut down. Jesus is the gardener, and the fig tree is humanity. The problem with this interpretation, for me, is that it sets up much the same kind of argument as the prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel says that if you're right with God, you'll bear fruit. And if you're not right with God, God will cut you down. Okay, that may be a simplification, but I'd like to look at the parable again. Let's start with the easy piece. I think that we all have a sense that the fig tree represents either the individual or all of humanity, or both. Like the fig tree, most of us feel stuck in one place with very little control of how we got there or where we're going. And this is a very young, immature fig tree. Can the fig tree control when it's going to start bearing fruit? About as well as we can control what color our hair is or how tall we are. So if we are the fig tree, I think the landowner represents a landowner. Maybe a hedge fund manager who bought the vineyard about 3 years ago and is now ready to flip it for big bucks. He's not interested in waiting around preserving unproductive fig trees. He is ready to take a profit this quarter. And the gardener? Well, I think Jesus tells us that God is the gardener. God is the one who cares for the fig tree. God is the one who supports its nurturance and its growth. God is there for the fig tree, for us, whether we thrive or whether we fail. Keep in mind, we are each planted, we are all planted on holy ground. Amen.